Hello again, everybody. I'm filming a little bit later than normal. It's a beautiful evening here, and I hope you guys are all having an amazing day and still a great Victober. Today I'm here with a little bit of an AuthorTube video. I want to talk about three specific things that I personally have learned about writing from some of the great writers. The ones I will be discussing will be Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, Shakespeare, and Henry James. Now, okay, I've been a writer for a few years. I'm published on a few sites. I'm not necessarily what you would call professional. I'm not regularly paid for my writings, but over the last year, I've become far more serious about my writing, and from what I can tell, my writing has improved a bit by following three little bits of indirect advice from some of my very favorite writers and some of the finest. Number one among these is you have to find the prose style, the words that fit whatever character it is that you have in mind. Now, I know that the high aesthetes worked this backward a little bit. Some of them decided to choose the character that would best fit their prose, yet, for the most part, from what I can tell from Henry James's notebooks, Virginia Woolf's diaries, and even from Shakespeare's poetry, it seems to me that, for the most part, characters and prose come together. A lot of the time you have an idea for a character at the same time you have an idea for a style. And that's very important because both character and prose style have to harmonize. I mean, the story, of course, must be whatever it is, but character and prose must harmonize at all times. For one, it keeps things a little bit more fluid. It makes more of your character and your style itself seem to fit where they are. There's a common writing tip that says try to write in a way that seems final. There is no other way to write this story or this essay. You've written it exactly as it should be. That is some of what you're aiming for, and this can help you along with that, keeping this in mind, that your prose and your character, and yes, your story too, I believe, despite the fact that many of the high aesthetes did not use, for instance, Virginia Woolf in The Waves doesn't have much of a story. Into the Lighthouse doesn't have much of a story. James Joyce's Ulysses is about a man walking down a street. I mean, there isn't much of a story here, but everything somehow seems to fit together. And I think that's an excellent tip to take away from them. Tip number 2. Try to really find out and then explain what your core beliefs are. Virginia Woolf is commonly touted as a feminist writer. She certainly had a particular, even as she wrote in her diaries, fondness for women. And she wrote in some of her essays in the collection Moments of Being quite a bit about what she believed, and in Three Guineas, what she believed women at university, women in even the armed forces, and women in power could possibly accomplish if they kept specific things on their minds, if they kept to specific aims. And many of these aims may now be considered to have been, even for the time, a bit unfeasible. Many accuse her of being largely out of touch with the world around her, and yet her work endures, yet it is still read today. So the simple fact of the matter is, she kept to her beliefs, as did James Joyce, who believed very much in his aesthetic sensibilities. He made sure that everything, every character, every story, every little scene in his novels perfectly coincided with his own beliefs as to how a story should be written, as to how an idea should be delineated, and as to how a character and a person should be connected with. And as for Shakespeare, many believe largely that he was a nihilist. Scholars and many different kinds of analysts say all the time that, that they look at other books and say, oh, here is a little bit of Shakespearean nihilism for you. Existentialism was born out of, many of them will say, it was born out of Shakespearean nihilistic theory. Because he seems throughout his entire over not to really believe in anything, not to believe in anything solidly. He disappears entirely into his stories, his characters, his themes. In my view, that can only mean one thing. Not that he believed nothing, but that in fact he believed quite a lot, and decided to, this is the key, decided to take his beliefs, take all of his biases and his particular desires and tastes, and play with them. He was among the first writers to play so extensively with his own ideas, his own beliefs. And that is certainly a key. That is a key to improving one's writing. Learn how to put an idea you have on a page. Sometimes when you see it, it's not going to look very good. Sometimes it's because you simply haven't written it out very well. And sometimes it's simply that the idea itself is not very, it's either not very developed, or let's just face it, it's probably not very good. So, putting things down, seeing your own ideas on the page, can help you to question them, can help you to pull them apart, can help you to take certain ends of them, details that you yourself have built up for them, and collect them all, then start connecting them in different ways. Start trying to maybe take a character, as Shakespeare did multiple times, and make them an embodiment of a specific idea. See how it works. See how things go together. There is a problem. There's a little bit of a danger in this. The main one is that sometimes as we're trying to connect characters to our ideas, and connect ideas to our stories, we can come off a little bit didactic, like we're really trying to teach people something. And as I have said before, literature, even philosophy, does not aim truly, not if it's really worth its name, shall we say, it doesn't actually aim to teach you anything. And even if it does aim to teach you, it doesn't. In the end, it doesn't teach you anything. You're the one who learns as you attempt to apply in your life the things that you believe, the things that you take in from multiple sources around you, and even from within yourself. And you build upon those things. You see what works. You try to put as much as you can in life, so well as in writing, onto the page. Play with it. Question it. Challenge it. And see where it goes. It's a very important thing to learn, I think, in fiction, especially because so many people get so focused on only telling a story or only trying to get a character across that they forget their own convictions. They forget what it is that they believe, so that in the end the writing doesn't seem to convey anything that the reader can wind up truly connecting to. What do we really connect to in fiction? It isn't simply a story. It isn't simply a person. It's also to convictions. It's to the ideas the character has, and it's to the themes that whatever the fictional plot is explores. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And then finally, this leads into the final bit that I've learned from great writers. That is, try to get to know as much about people as you can. Does this mean going on every day and reading the news? Does this mean keeping up with Harper's Magazine and Reddit and other outlets of that social sort? Not necessarily. The writers, the greatest writers, looked inward at themselves. They tried to understand as much as they could about their own nature. And then they extended that knowledge to the outside world. They pulled different things in from the outside world, things they observed, things they felt, things that affected them in many different ways in the outside world, and internalized them, made them important to themselves, made them a part of their own personal world within. And then were able to analyze them, to, like any other ideas they would have had, pull them apart, question them, see where they fit. And then they were able to write something that really gave us, that continues to give us, readers, a real sense. We seem to find bits of ourselves, we find bits of our own world, we find multiple different things to connect to in these works because of how much these writers looked within and internalized everything they saw without. So it's a good idea. I think it's a very, very good idea. Does this equate with, in psychology, you're warned, of course, against making other people's problems your own. You're warned against making everything in the world too much of your own worry, your own concern. I'm not really talking about that. When you're writing something, this is the way I see it. This is the way these writers have taught me. When you are writing anything, everything is your concern. It's the concern of the page. Now, of course, you have to sift through all of these concerns and try to find what fits the thing you are trying to compose, the message you are trying to send. And if you're plotting or you're trying to get into a character, you have to find what fits these things you are inventing. So, internalize as much as possible, and then you will be able to achieve what Henry James set out to. He said in his art of fiction, I've said this before, try to be one of those people on whom nothing is lost. If you observe everything, if you look within as much as possible, and try, indeed, again, putting your ideas on paper, saying them out loud, trying somehow to give yourself the ideas you have, then maybe you'll be able to open yourself up a little bit more to further possibilities, to answers to many different kinds of questions that maybe you haven't asked before because you've never put these things on paper before. It's an important thing to keep in mind. And one thing for sure that all of the greatest writers did is they put everything on paper. Everything they thought, everything they wondered about, everything that they observed, everything that they really felt most deeply, everything they believed. They put it all down. We don't have any of Shakespeare's, not as far as I know, we don't have any of Shakespeare's personal notes or journals or papers, whatever it is he might have kept in order to construct the foundations of all of his plays or his poems. But we have the poems and plays themselves to show us that indeed he put everything down. Everything. People have said, Harold Bloom has said that Shakespeare invented the human being. Because indeed Shakespeare internalized so much of what he saw around him, and he attempted to express it from within. So that becomes another very important thing to keep in mind. Try to put everything that you can down on the page. Not only is it going to help you with practice, you always need to practice your writing. Practice putting the sentences together. Practice trying to convey a message. or complete a scene, or to improve your dialogue if you're writing fiction, or even if you're writing nonfiction. When you're writing nonfiction, you're writing an essay or a biography or anything of that nature, you have to learn how to fit facts into an arc of their own. So this helps you a lot with that, with the practice. But then it also allows you to see everything that you think, everything that you've observed in your life, everything you've taken from other people, and do something with it. See what works. See if a lot of it can just be left out. Some of it can be left out permanently. You don't ever need to use it in a story, use it in an essay, but sometimes the most absurd things, sometimes the most surprisingly, the most seemingly useless can surprise you and be of use in maybe some strange way. But you won't have thought of that way until you've put it down. So, anyway, these are some things that I've learned from these writers. It's been quite a process. Learning how to write is quite a process. But this brings me definitely to maybe a final little something, which is definitely to read as much as possible. Do keep reading. There are a lot of writers I've spoken with and writers I have heard scholastics and critics complain about who don't take that extra time, as they would say. They call it extra. And they don't read as much as they possibly can to simply, in the very least, see certain things done that maybe they're trying to do. See how someone else did it, and then see how else you would like to do it. It's probably the only way that we learn anything from reading. You mainly learn how to write, yes, by writing. You practice, you keep trying to put things together and see what works. But reading, at least, in the very least, helps you to see how somebody else did whatever it is you want to do at some point, and did it well. So it becomes very, very helpful. So, I hope that in any way at all, this is helpful or even encouraging. I know that it's difficult because a lot of us, we get into this habit of trying to perfect one part of our writing. We try to do one thing, and we forget so much of the larger picture. We're trying to perfect our prose, or we're trying to make that character work, or we're trying to make sure that our plot makes sense, or doesn't have any kind of holes or anything of that nature. All of these things can be good if you don't obsess over them too much, because then you over-edit, you over-polish, and a lot of your, again, convictions, ideas, your personal poetry, your personal philosophy is lost. So, hope this is helpful. Hope you enjoyed it, in the very least. And thank you guys again for this amazing continuing conversation I've been having with all of you. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.